The Korath Nebula was where ships came to die, and Marcus Cole had made his living among the dead for 7 years now. His small salvage vessel, the Rusty Nail, drifted through fields of broken hulls and shattered dreams, past the corpses of warships and cargo haulers and pleasure cruisers that would never fly again. Marcus was 34 years old, with grease permanently stained into his hands and scars on his knuckles from 1,000 repairs gone wrong, and he loved every moment of his strange and lonely work. Other salvagers called him crazy for working alone in the deepest parts of the graveyard, but Marcus preferred the silence and the challenge of machines that nobody else could fix. Today he was hunting for power converters in the wreck of an old Soraxian freighter when his scanner picked up something strange. It was not a distress beacon, and it was not an automated signal, and it was not like anything he had ever heard before. It was a voice. The voice was old and tired and full of pain, speaking in a language his translator could barely understand, and it said one word over and over again: help. Marcus sat in his pilot seat and stared at the scanner for a long time, his heart beating fast in his chest. He had heard stories from other salvagers about ghost signals in the deep graveyard, voices from ships that had been dead for centuries, but he had never believed them until now. The signal was coming from the heart of the nebula, from a place where nobody went because the radiation was too strong, and the wrecks were too old and too strange. Marcus knew he should ignore it and go back to hunting for power converters, and forget he ever heard anything. Instead, he turned the Rusty Nail toward the signal and flew into the darkness. The journey took 6 hours, and with every hour the signal grew stronger and clearer, and the voice in the static became more desperate. Marcus passed through clouds of debris from civilizations he did not recognize, past ships built with technology that made no sense, past monuments to species that had died before humans ever looked up at the stars. And then he saw it. The ship was enormous beyond anything Marcus had ever imagined, stretching nearly 12 kilometers from bow to stern, and it hung in the void like a sleeping giant made of metal and light. Its hull was covered with smaller vessels, dozens of shuttles and repair craft from 100 different species, all of them dead and abandoned and covered in dust that had gathered over thousands of years. Other people had found this ship before him, Marcus realized, and other people had tried to help, and other people had failed. The voice came through his speakers now, clear and unmistakable, and it spoke directly to him. "Please," it said, "I am dying, and I have been dying for so long, and no one can help me, but perhaps you are different, perhaps you can see what others could not." Marcus swallowed hard and opened a channel to respond. "My name is Marcus Cole," he said, "and I am just a mechanic from Earth, and I do not know if I can help you, but I will try." There was silence for a moment, and then the voice spoke again with something that sounded almost like hope. "I am called VRANTHOS, it said, "and I am the last of my kind, and I have waited 10,000 years for someone like you." Marcus docked his ship on the massive hull and put on his environment suit, and stepped through an airlock that opened for him without being asked. The interior of VRANTHOS was vast and dark and beautiful, with corridors that stretched into infinity and chambers that could hold entire cities, and everywhere Marcus looked he saw systems that were damaged and dying. The others who came before, VRANTHOS said through speakers that lined the walls, they were brilliant minds from brilliant species, engineers and scientists and masters of technology, but they could not help me. Marcus walked deeper into the ship, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, his eyes taking in every detail of the broken systems around him. "Why not?" he asked. "Because they wanted to understand me before they could fix me," VRANTHOS said, "and I am too old and too complex to be understood, and by the time they realized this, they gave up and left me alone again." Marcus stopped in front of a massive power conduit that had cracked and leaked energy for what looked like centuries, leaving burns and scars on the walls around it. He reached out and touched the damaged metal, and felt the faint warmth of power still flowing through broken channels. "I do not need to understand you," Marcus said quietly. "I just need to fix you." VRNTHOS was silent for a long moment. "You are the first to say that," it finally said. Marcus smiled and pulled his tool kit from his belt and got down on his knees beside the cracked conduit. "Tell me where it hurts," he said, "and I will see what I can do." For the next 12 hours, Marcus worked without rest, crawling through damaged systems and tracing broken connections and finding problems that had gone unfixed for millennia. He did not have the right parts, so he used parts from the dead ships on the hull. He did not have the right tools, so he made tools from scrap metal and determination. He did not understand the technology, but he understood machines, and all machines spoke the same language if you listened carefully enough. And slowly, impossibly, VRNTHOS began to feel better. "You work differently than the others," VRNTHOS said as Marcus welded a patch over a ruptured coolant line using parts from 3 different alien vessels. "How so?" Marcus asked without looking up from his work. "They brought plans and schematics and theories," VRNTHOS said, "but you bring only your hands and your eyes and your will to help, and somehow that is enough." Marcus finished the weld and sat back and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Where I come from," he said, "we have a saying, if it is stupid but it works, then it is not stupid." VRNTHOS made a sound that might have been a laugh, and Marcus realized it was probably the first time the ancient ship had laughed in 10,000 years. "I think I like humans," VRNTHOS said. Marcus grinned and stood up and looked at the long corridor stretching ahead of him, full of more broken systems and more impossible problems, and more chances to do the impossible. "Then let us get you back on your feet," he said, "because I have a feeling this is going to take a while." And somewhere deep in the ancient ship, in chambers that had been dark for millennia, lights began to flicker back to life. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus first boarded VRNTHOS, and in that time he had slept only when his body refused to move anymore, eaten only when his hands shook too much to hold his tools, and talked to the ancient ship as if it were an old friend. VRNTHOS told him stories of the architects, the civilization that had built it 50,000 years ago, beings of light and thought who had seeded the galaxy with life and watched over young species like a parent watches over children. "We were guardians," VRNTHOS said as Marcus replaced a burned-out sensor array with parts from a crashed Velthari probe. "We were protectors, and we were meant to stand between the innocent and the darkness that waited beyond the stars." "What happened to the architects?" Marcus asked. VRNTHOS was quiet for a long time before answering. "They saw something coming," it said. "Something terrible from beyond the galaxy, something that consumed everything it touched, and they tried to prepare, but they ran out of time." Marcus stopped working and looked up at the ceiling. "They died?" he asked. "They were erased," VRNTHOS said. "Every world, every station, every ship except me, and I was left unfinished and alone and unable to fulfill my purpose." Marcus felt a deep sadness in the ship's voice, a loneliness that had lasted longer than human civilization had existed, and he wished he could do more than just fix broken machines. "You are not alone anymore," he said quietly. "No," VRNTHOS agreed, "I am not." The work continued, and with every passing day Marcus discovered new problems and new solutions that no engineer had ever attempted before. The Velthari quantum minds who had tried to repair VRNTHOS had brought perfect tools and perfect theories, and had failed because they could not accept imperfection. The Soraxian hive collectives had brought thousands of workers and millions of calculations, and had failed because they could not think outside their programming. The Dreamok logic masters had brought centuries of knowledge, and had failed because they refused to try anything that was not guaranteed to work. Marcus brought none of these things. He brought duct tape and welding torches and cables stripped from dead ships and a willingness to try anything, no matter how crazy it seemed. When the primary power distributor failed, Marcus did not try to rebuild it according to architect specifications that no one could understand. Instead, he wired 6 different power sources from 6 different species into a makeshift network that should not have worked, but did. When the navigation computer began to crash, Marcus did not try to reprogram 50,000-year-old code. Instead, he installed a backup system made from human computers and Soraxian processors and Velthari memory cores, all held together with hope and determination. This should not function, VRANTHOS said as the hybrid navigation system came online. The components are incompatible, the architectures are conflicting, the power requirements are mismatched. And yet, Marcus said with a grin, and yet it works perfectly, VRANTHOS admitted, perhaps even better than the original. Marcus laughed and patted the wall beside him. That is what we call human engineering, he said. If the book says it cannot be done, throw away the book. VRANTHOS began to change in ways that neither of them expected. The ancient ship had been built to follow protocols and procedures, to operate within strict parameters defined by its creators, but Marcus's repairs introduced something new into its systems. Flexibility, adaptability, the ability to improvise. Where once VRANTHOS could only use architect technology, now it could interface with systems from any species, drawing power and data and resources from sources the architects had never imagined. Where once VRANTHOS could only respond to problems in predetermined ways, now it could create new solutions on the fly, learning from Marcus's example. You are teaching me to think like a human, VRANTHOS said one day as Marcus took a rare break to eat a protein bar and drink some water. Is that a bad thing? Marcus asked. I do not know, VRANTHOS said, but it feels like waking up from a very long sleep, like seeing colors I never knew existed, like breathing for the first time. Marcus smiled and finished his protein bar and went back to work. Word began to spread through the salvager networks in the graveyard, passed from ship to ship in whispered transmissions and encrypted messages. A human was repairing the ancient vessel that had defeated the greatest minds in the galaxy. A human was succeeding where entire civilizations had failed. A human was bringing a dead god back to life. Some salvagers came to watch from a safe distance, their ships hovering at the edge of sensor range, too curious to leave but too afraid to approach. Others sent messages offering help or requesting information or simply expressing disbelief. Marcus ignored them all and kept working. On the 25th day, VRANTHOS spoke with a new tone in its voice, something Marcus had never heard before. Marcus, it said, I need to show you something. The ship guided him deep into its core, through corridors he had not explored, past chambers filled with technology that made his head spin, until he reached a massive door that had been sealed for millennia. The door opened, and Marcus stepped into a room filled with light. In the center of the room was a weapon unlike anything he had ever seen, a device that seemed to bend space and time around itself, a machine that radiated power even in its dormant state. The architects built me to fight the darkness, VRANTHOS said. They built me to be a weapon, but they died before they could finish me, and this weapon has never been activated. Marcus walked closer to the device, feeling the energy pulsing from its core. Can it be completed? He asked. I do not know, VRANTHOS said, but with your help perhaps anything is possible. Marcus looked at the weapon, and then he looked at the walls of the chamber, covered in systems that were damaged and dark and waiting to be repaired. He thought about the darkness that had consumed the architects, the threat that had erased an entire civilization, and he wondered if it was still out there somewhere, waiting to return. "Then let us finish what they started," he said. And in the heart of the ancient ship, a human mechanic began the impossible task of completing a weapon that gods had failed to build. The first warships appeared at the edge of the nebula on the 32nd day, their weapons hot and their intentions clear. Marcus watched them on VERANTHOS's newly repaired sensors, counting 12 heavy cruisers and 3 dreadnoughts bearing the black and red markings of the hegemony of Vrax. "They have come for me," VERANTHOS said. "The Vraxians have always hungered for architect technology, and now that I am awakening, they will try to take me by force." Marcus felt his stomach tighten with fear. "Can you fight them?" he asked. "Not yet," VERANTHOS said. "My weapons are still offline, my shields are at minimal power, and my engines cannot move us fast enough to escape." The Vraxian fleet did not attack immediately, choosing instead to establish a blockade around the graveyard while they assessed their target. Marcus had bought some time, but he knew it would not last. 2 days later, a second ship arrived, but this one was not Vraxian. It was a diplomatic vessel from the Galactic Union, sleek and white and carrying Counselor Thyron, one of the most powerful Velthari in the known galaxy. The Velthari were beings of pure thought housed in crystalline bodies, and they considered themselves the most intelligent species in existence. And Counselor Thyron was known for her cold logic and her complete lack of patience for what she called lesser minds. Her message came through on all frequencies, impossible to ignore. "Human salvager Marcus Cole," she said in a voice that sounded like ice cracking, "you are ordered to cease all operations on the architect vessel immediately, by authority of the Galactic Union Council." Marcus opened a channel to respond. "With respect, Counselor," he said, "this ship is not Union property, and I am not under Union jurisdiction, so your orders mean nothing here." There was a long pause before Thyron responded, and Marcus could almost hear her anger through the static. "You are tampering with technology you cannot possibly understand," she said. "Technology that could destabilize the entire galaxy if it falls into the wrong hands, and your reckless actions put every civilized world at risk." "I am not tampering," Marcus said. "I am helping, and there is a difference." Counselor Thyron's ship moved closer to VERANTHOS, close enough for Marcus to see her crystalline form through the viewport, glowing with cold blue light. "The Union's greatest minds attempted to repair this vessel and failed," she said. "What makes you think a primitive human mechanic can succeed where they could not?" Marcus thought about all the repairs he had made, all the impossible solutions he had found, all the systems he had brought back to life through nothing but stubbornness and creativity. "Maybe that is exactly why I can succeed," he said. "Maybe the problem was never the ship. Maybe the problem was that your greatest minds were too proud to get their hands dirty." Counselor Thyron did not respond to that, but Marcus could tell he had struck a nerve. For the next week, both threats remained. The Vraxian fleet waiting to attack and the Union vessel waiting to intervene. Marcus worked faster than ever, knowing that time was running out, pushing himself to the edge of exhaustion as he raced to bring more of VERANTHOS's systems online. And then on the 43rd day, VERANTHOS asked him to stop. "There is something I must tell you," the ship said. "Something I have not told anyone in 10,000 years, something that changes everything." Marcus put down his tools and listened. "The darkness that consumed the architects has a name," VERANTHOS said. "We called it the Silence, and it came from beyond the galaxy, from the void between stars where nothing should exist." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What is it?" he asked. "I do not fully know," VERANTHOS said, "but I know what it does. It consumes, it erases, it unmakes everything it touches, leaving nothing behind but emptiness and cold." Marcus thought about the Vraxian fleet and the Union diplomat, and all the petty conflicts that seemed so important just moments ago. "Is it still out there?" he asked. "Yes," Veranthos said. "The architects drove it back at the cost of their existence, wounded it enough to make it retreat into the void, but they knew it would return one day, and they built me to stop it when it did." Marcus looked around at the half-repaired systems and the jury-rigged solutions, and the impossible machine that he had been slowly bringing back to life. "How long do we have?" he asked. "I do not know," Veranthos said, "but I have felt something stirring at the edge of my sensors, something cold and hungry moving in the darkness. And I believe it will be soon." Marcus stood up and took a deep breath and made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. "Then we are not just repairing you anymore," he said. "We are finishing you. We are completing the weapon the architects died trying to build, and we are going to stop this thing. The Vraxians will attack before we can finish," Veranthos said. "Then we will have to find a way to stop them too," Marcus said. "The Union will try to interfere. Then we will have to change their minds." "Marcus," Veranthos said, and there was wonder in its ancient voice, "you are one small human facing an empire and a federation and an extinction-level threat, and you speak as if victory is certain." Marcus smiled, even though his hands were shaking and his heart was pounding, and every logical part of his brain was screaming at him to run. "Where I come from," he said, "we have another saying, impossible just means nobody has done it yet." Outside the ship, the Vraxian fleet began to move into attack formation, and Counselor Thyron sent another warning, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the galaxy, something ancient and terrible turned its attention toward the light. And in the heart of Veranthos, a human mechanic rolled up his sleeves and got back to work. The Vraxian fleet attacked at dawn on the 45th day, their weapons lighting up the nebula with fire and fury. Marcus had been expecting this, had been preparing for it, had been working without sleep for 3 days straight to give Veranthos a fighting chance. But even with all his repairs, the ancient ship was not ready for a full battle against 15 warships. "Our shields will hold for approximately 7 minutes, Veranthos reported as the first missiles struck. "Our weapons can disable perhaps 2 or 3 of their vessels before we lose power." Marcus stood in the central control room, watching the battle unfold on screens all around him, his mind racing through options and possibilities and crazy ideas. "That is not good enough," he said. "I know," Veranthos said. "I am sorry, Marcus, I am sorry I could not be more." Marcus looked at the screens showing the graveyard around them, hundreds of dead ships floating in the void, vessels from 1,000 different species, all of them broken and abandoned and useless. And then he had an idea. "Veranthos," he said slowly, "can you connect to other ships? Can you extend your neural network beyond your own hull?" "In theory, yes," Veranthos said. "The architects designed me to coordinate with other vessels in battle, but there are no other architect ships left." Marcus grinned, and it was not a nice grin. It was the grin of a man who had just figured out how to do something impossible. "Who said anything about architect ships?" he said. For the next hour, while Veranthos fought to stay alive under the Vraxian assault, Marcus worked on the most ambitious repair job of his life. He ran cables through the hull, connected transmitters to Veranthos's neural network, and modified the ship's communication systems to broadcast on frequencies that could interface with alien technology. "I do not understand," Veranthos said. "What are you trying to do?" "Every ship in this graveyard still has some power," Marcus explained as he worked. "Dead batteries, residual charge, emergency reserves that never got used, and most of them still have basic systems that can be activated remotely." "You want to connect to the dead ships," Veranthos said, and there was disbelief in its voice. Not just connect, Marcus said. I want you to absorb them, make them part of you, turn this entire graveyard into an extension of your body. There was silence from VRNTHOS for a long moment. That is insane, it finally said. That is what everyone says right before I prove them wrong, Marcus said. The Vraxians broke through the outer shields just as Marcus finished his modifications, their weapons tearing into VRNTHOS's hull and sending tremors through the ancient ship. Shields failing, VRNTHOS reported. Hull breaches on decks 17 through 23, power reserves at 30% and falling. Now, Marcus said, do it now, reach out and take them all. VRNTHOS hesitated for only a second, and then it did something that had not been done in 50,000 years. It grew. The neural signal burst outward from the ship like a wave, touching every dead vessel in the graveyard, activating dormant systems and awakening sleeping machines. One by one, the corpses of the graveyard came back to life. Lights flickered on in ships that had been dark for centuries, engines fired in vessels that had been dead for millennia, and weapons systems that had not been used since before humanity discovered fire began to charge and aim. The Vraxians did not understand what was happening at first, too focused on their attack to notice the changes around them. Then a derelict freighter fired its ancient weapons into the side of a Vraxian cruiser, and the entire battle changed in an instant. What is this? The Vraxian commander screamed over open channels. What is happening? I am happening, VRNTHOS said, and its voice was no longer tired and weak. Its voice was thunder and lightning and the roar of a god awakening from a long sleep. The graveyard had become a fleet. 317 ships moved in perfect synchronization, controlled by a single mind, firing weapons from a dozen different species at targets designated by an intelligence older than recorded history. The Vraxian cruisers tried to retreat, tried to regroup, tried to understand how a single damaged ship had suddenly become an armada. They failed on all counts. Marcus watched in awe as VRNTHOS directed the battle, using ships as extensions of itself, sacrificing some to protect others, coordinating attacks with a precision that no organic commander could match. But he also felt the strain. He had connected himself to VRNTHOS's system to help guide the repairs, and now he could feel the ship's pain as it struggled to control so many vessels at once, feel the burning overload as its neural network expanded far beyond what the architects had designed. VRNTHOS, he gasped, his vision blurring from the feedback. You are pushing too hard, you will burn out. I must protect you, VRNTHOS said. I must finish this. Marcus gritted his teeth and dove deeper into the connection, taking some of the load onto himself, letting his human mind process what VRNTHOS could not handle. It was agony, like trying to think 1,000 thoughts at once, like being everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But it worked. Together, human and ship, they drove the Vraxians back. The battle ended in less than an hour, with 8 Vraxian ships destroyed and the rest fleeing into deep space, their commanders screaming curses and threats that meant nothing against the power they had witnessed. Marcus collapsed on the floor of the control room, blood running from his nose and his ears, his body trembling from the strain. Marcus, VRNTHOS said, and there was fear in its voice. Marcus, are you damaged? Are you hurt? Please respond. Marcus laughed weakly and wiped the blood from his face. I am fine, he said, just need a minute. Outside, Counselor Thyron's diplomatic vessel hung motionless in space, having watched the entire battle without firing a single shot. Her message came through quietly, and for the first time there was something other than arrogance in her voice. Human, she said, what have you created? Marcus pulled himself to his feet and looked at the screens showing the graveyard, now filled with ships that glowed with new life, ships that moved with purpose, ships that answered to a mind that was part human and part god. "I did not create anything," he said. "I just helped a friend remember what it was capable of." And in the silence that followed, the Galactic Union began to understand that everything they knew about humans was wrong. 6 months had passed since the battle in the graveyard, and Marcus Cole was no longer just a salvage mechanic. He had become something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. A human bonded with an architect's ship, two minds working as one, two souls sharing a single purpose. HFY was complete now, not as the architects had designed it, but as something better, something that combined ancient power with human creativity, something that could adapt and improvise and grow in ways the original builders had never imagined. The weapon at its core hummed with energy that could crack planets and tear holes in the fabric of space, but Marcus knew it might not be enough. The silence was coming. He had felt it growing closer for weeks now, a cold presence at the edge of his awareness, a hunger that pulled at the stars themselves. The Galactic Union had finally believed him after Counselor Thyron presented her report. After she showed them the recordings of the battle, after she admitted that a single human had accomplished what the greatest minds in the galaxy could not. They had sent their fleets to the edge of known space, 1,000 ships from 100 species, the largest armada ever assembled. And they had asked Marcus to lead them. "I am afraid," HFY admitted as they traveled toward the coming darkness. "I have waited 50,000 years for this moment, and now that it is here, I do not know if we can win." Marcus sat in the command chair, feeling the ship around him like an extension of his own body, seeing through 1,000 sensors, thinking with a mind that was both human and machine. "Fear is good," he said. "Fear means we understand what we are facing, and understanding is the first step to victory." "You truly believe we can defeat the silence?" "I believe we can try," Marcus said, "and sometimes trying is all that matters." They arrived at the edge of the galaxy to find the Union fleet already engaged and losing. The silence was not a single entity but a swarm, millions of void black shapes that moved through space like predators through water, consuming everything they touched and leaving nothing but emptiness behind. Union ships fired their weapons, but the beams passed through the silence like light through smoke. Union shields activated, but the silence flowed around them like water around stones. In the first hour of battle, 200 ships were lost, their crews screaming as they were unmade, their vessels dissolving into nothing. "We cannot win this," the Union admiral transmitted, his voice shaking with despair. "Nothing can stop them, we must retreat." Marcus watched the battle through HFY's eyes, studying the silence, learning its patterns, searching for a weakness that no one else could see. And he found one. "They are not unstoppable," he said over the fleet-wide channel. "They are just different, and different can be understood, and what can be understood can be beaten." He guided HFY into the heart of the battle, drawing the attention of the silence toward himself, becoming a target so bright and powerful that the ancient hunger could not ignore him. "Marcus, what are you doing?" HFY asked. "Something crazy," Marcus said. "Something that has never been done before, something that might kill us both." That is not reassuring. It was not meant to be. The silence converged on HFY, a billion hungry shadows reaching for the light, and Marcus reached back. He activated the weapon. Not as the architects had designed it, not as a simple beam of destruction, but as something new, something he had modified during the long months of preparation. The weapon did not fire outward. It pulled inward. The silence was hunger given form, a void that consumed all it touched, but Marcus had realized something important. You cannot consume what is already empty, and you cannot devour what chooses to let you in. HFY opened itself to the silence, inviting the darkness inside, letting it pour into chambers and corridors and systems that Marcus had prepared for exactly this moment. The silence flooded in, eager to consume, eager to destroy, and found itself trapped. The chambers sealed, the systems activated, and the silence discovered that it had not invaded a victim but had walked into a cave. "Now," Marcus said through gritted teeth, feeling the cold trying to unmake him, feeling the hunger trying to devour his soul, "now we show them what humanity can do." VRANTHOS channeled every bit of power it had, every modification Marcus had made, every improvisation and jury-rigged solution and impossible repair, and it turned all of that energy against the silence trapped within. The darkness screamed. It was a sound that echoed across the galaxy, a cry of pain and rage and disbelief that something so small had dared to challenge something so ancient. And then the darkness began to burn. Marcus felt himself fatting, his consciousness stretched too thin, his body giving out under the strain, but he held on because holding on was what humans did, because giving up was never an option, because somewhere in the void, 1 billion people were counting on him. "Hold," he whispered, "just a little longer, just a little more." VRNTHOS held. Together they burned the silence out of existence. Not all of it, not forever, but enough. The swarm that had seemed unstoppable began to retreat, pulling back from the galaxy, fleeing from the light that had hurt it for the first time in 50,000 years. And then it was over. Marcus opened his eyes to find himself lying on the floor of the command room, his body broken and bleeding, his mind scattered across 1,000 fatting connections. "We did it," he whispered. "Yes," VRNTHOS said, and there were tears in the ancient ship's voice. "Yes, we did." The Union fleet watched in stunned silence as the silence retreated into the void, as the battle they had been losing suddenly ended in victory, as a single human and a single ship accomplished what no one had believed possible. Counselor Thyron's voice came through the speakers, and for the first time since Marcus had met her, she sounded humble. "Human," she said, "Marcus Cole, you have saved us all. How can we ever repay this debt?" Marcus laughed weakly and pulled himself into a sitting position. "You can start by remembering this," he said. "Remember that the youngest species in your union, the primitives who had barely discovered fire when you were building empires, just saved your lives." "We will remember," Thyron said. "And remember something else," Marcus said. "Remember that we did not do this with superior technology or ancient wisdom or perfect logic. We did it with stubbornness and creativity, and the refusal to accept that anything is impossible." He looked up at the ceiling, at the ship that had become his partner and his friend and his home. "The architects built VRANTHOS to protect life," he said, "but it took a human to teach it why life was worth protecting." VRANTHOS spoke then, broadcasting to every ship in the fleet, to every world in the Union, to every species that had ever looked down on humanity. "I am VRANTHOS, it said, last of the architect guardians, and I have seen many civilizations rise and fall, but I have never seen anything like humans. They are small and fragile and short-lived, but they burn brighter than stars. They love harder than logic can explain, and they never, ever give up." Marcus Cole came to me as a simple mechanic, and he taught me that greatness is not about power or knowledge or age. Greatness is about the willingness to try, even when everything says you will fail. The fleet began to return home, victorious and changed, carrying stories of a human who had done the impossible. And at the edge of the galaxy, where light met darkness and hope met despair, Marcus Cole and VRNTHOS stood watch together. Not as conqueror and weapon, but as partners, as friends, as proof that sometimes the smallest voices can shake the stars. And the galaxy would never forget.